Tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll...
Right now, as you're watching this video, a Canadian tool and die manufacturer, a real business employing real people in your neighborhood, just got a phone call that could shut them down in 90 days. Not because they did anything wrong, not because their product got worse, not because they lost customers, but because overnight, the United States government changed a single line in a tariff document. And now, instead of paying a small percentage on the steel inside their machinery, they're paying a tariff on the entire apparatus. The business owner told a former Canadian MP this week, "This could put me out of business in 3 months." 3 months. And while politicians in Ottawa are debating whether to demand the release of the Epstein files as a negotiating tactic, I am not joking. Real Canadian industries are packing up and considering moving to the United States. So today, we're going to cut through every single talking point, every political spin, and every distraction, and give you the real picture of what is happening between Canada and the United States, what the actual leverage is, and what needs to happen right now for Canada to survive this economic war. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is being ignored by almost every major media outlet. Let's start with the numbers that should be on the front page of every newspaper in Canada, but aren't. Between now and 2030, Canada's projected revenue growth is only 20%. That sounds okay, right? Growth is growth. Here's the problem. Canada's debt service charges, the money we owe just to service our debt, is projected to grow by 50%. Let that sink in. Your revenue goes up 20 cents on the dollar. Your debt payments go up 50 cents on the dollar. You're not just falling behind. You're running backwards on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, and this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening while the United States has weaponized tariffs against our most important export sectors: steel, aluminum, automotive parts, pharmaceutical inputs, agricultural goods. The revenues being as flat as the numbers show is, and I want to use the exact word economists are using right now, problematic. Not concerning, not something to monitor, problematic. Here's what the math means for average Canadians. If Ottawa cannot grow revenues faster than its debt costs, it has 2 options: print money and inflate your savings away. Cut services, healthcare, infrastructure, transfers to provinces. Neither of those options is going to feel good in your household. And the cause? It's a 2-layer problem. Layer 1. 10 years of economic mismanagement under the previous Liberal government that froze pipeline development, drove away private energy investment, and added hundreds of billions in federal spending without building productive capacity. Layer 2, the Trump tariff shock of 2025, which didn't cause Canada's structural problems, but pulled the emergency brake on an already weakening economy at the worst possible moment. Let me tell you about a specific industry that most people have never heard of, but that quietly keeps Canada's automotive and aerospace sectors running: tool and die mold makers. These are the companies that make the precision molds used to stamp, press, and form metal parts. Without them, there are no car frames, no aircraft panels, no medical device casings. A group of these manufacturers, small and mid-sized Canadian businesses, recently reached out to government contacts expressing a crisis. Before the 2025 tariff changes, they paid a tariff only on the percentage of steel contained in their finished molds. After the tariff reclassification, they are now paying tariffs on the entire apparatus, the full value of the finished product. For some of these businesses, that difference isn't survivable. And here's the devastating part. They're not thinking about lobbying. They're not thinking about waiting for a trade deal. They're thinking about whether it makes more financial sense to move their entire operation to the United States. And if they move, Canada loses the jobs. Canada loses the tax revenue. Canada loses the innovation. Canada loses the supplier relationships with its own automotive sector. This is not an abstract economic theory. This is happening right now. The tool and die story is not unique. It's a pattern playing out across softwood lumber, agricultural exporters, pharmaceutical raw material, importers, auto parts manufacturers in Ontario. The 232 national security tariffs, that's the legal mechanism Trump is using, are not normal trade tariffs. They were designed for wartime emergencies, and they're being applied to Canada, America's largest trading partner and closest ally. That tells you everything you need to know about the current posture of the Trump administration. Here's where the conversation gets interesting, and where most media coverage gets it completely wrong. Canada is not powerless here. Canada has a legally binding trade agreement that the United States cannot simply rip up. It's called CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. You might know it as USMCA on the American side. And here's the key word: legally binding. Unlike the trade frameworks the UK or Japan recently negotiated with the Trump administration, which analysts have noted are not truly enforceable, CUSMA is in effect until 2036. To exit or fundamentally alter CUSMA, the President of the United States cannot act alone. He would need to go through both the House of Representatives and the Senate. That's the law. So what is Trump actually doing? He's using the pain of the 232 tariffs, the national security tariffs that bypass the normal CUSMA framework, to force Canada to come to the table and voluntarily agree to add tariff provisions into CUSMA itself. He's not breaking the law. He's causing economic pain until Canada flinches and gives him what a court order can't. The question for Canada's government is, do the economic damages from the 232 tariffs outweigh the long-term cost of agreeing to an embedded general tariff inside CUSMA? That calculation, and it's brutally complicated, is precisely what the newly formed Canada-U.S. Economic Advisory Council is being assembled to help answer. Former Canadian MP Lisa Raitt, now a senior banker and newly appointed to that advisory council, put it clearly in a recent interview. The magic in all of this is whether the Trump administration actually wants to do a deal. If Prime Minister Carney believes a deal is possible within days, it means he has some insight into where the American bottom line actually is. And that's the critical intelligence question nobody in public can fully answer. Now, I want to talk about what might be the single biggest unforced error in Canadian economic history over the last decade. And before I say it, let me be clear, this is not a partisan point. The math is the math. Canada needed a pipeline to Tidewater, not Keystone XL. That's a pipeline going south into the American market. That's not diversification. That's deepening dependency on the very country that's currently imposing tariffs on us. Canada needed, and still needs, a pipeline going west or north to reach the Pacific or Arctic Ocean, to reach Asian markets, European markets, markets that aren't controlled by the country currently trying to squeeze us economically. Here's the brutal counterfactual. If Canada had approved and built a Tidewater pipeline 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, what would our position look like today in these trade negotiations? The answer is dramatically stronger. More revenue flowing from energy exports to non-U.S. buyers. More fiscal room to absorb the tariff shock. More time to outlast American pressure without our industries collapsing. More leverage at the negotiating table because we're less dependent on American goodwill. Instead, the previous federal government spent years signaling hostility to pipeline investment. Private proponents, the companies that would have built pipelines using private capital, not taxpayer money, walked away. The investment climate soured, and now we're left with a situation where even politicians who support pipelines openly acknowledge there's no private proponent ready to build one. The land has been, as one former MP described it, salted. You can't grow crops on salted earth. Norway, which has roughly 5 million people, similar to a large Canadian province, built a sovereign wealth fund from oil revenues that is now worth over $1.7 trillion. Canada has been sitting on one of the largest energy reserves on Earth and has net debt approaching $1.2 trillion. That contrast doesn't require commentary. It speaks for itself. So where does this leave Canada politically, and what should you actually expect over the next 6 to 12 months? Let's be clear-eyed about a few things. On the trade deal, Prime Minister Carney has signaled confidence that a deal is achievable. The UK and Japan have recently concluded agreements with the Trump administration. Even if those agreements are criticized as not being fully legally enforceable, they reduce tariff rates to 10–20% in many sectors. Is 15% better than 50%? Absolutely. Is it as good as zero, which is what CUSMA currently guarantees on most goods? No. But the businesses getting crushed by 232 tariffs right now may not survive long enough to enjoy the legal protections of CUSMA if no deal is reached in the interim on the political landscape. The Conservative Party of Canada faces a challenging moment. After a disappointing election result, some voices are calling for leadership changes, floor-crossing controversies are generating headlines, and there's a real risk that conservative voters, particularly in Western Canada, drift into apathy. Show graphic, simple sentiment chart, conservative voter mood. That apathy is dangerous, not just for one political party, but for Canadian democracy. Because when one side of the political spectrum gives up, it doesn't mean their concerns disappear. It means their concerns go unrepresented. And unrepresented grievances have a way of finding other, less healthy outlets. On the economy, the new Liberal majority government has caught the bus it was chasing. It now has to drive it. And Canadians, including many who voted Liberal, are watching with a simple question. Can you deliver? On affordability, on economic growth, on housing, on the trade file, on energy development. The political honeymoon, if there is one, will be shorter than usual because the external pressure from American tariffs creates a hard deadline that no government can spin away. I want to end with something that doesn't get said enough in political commentary, because it's easy to watch this and feel paralyzed. The tariffs are real, the economic pressure is real, the political dysfunction on multiple sides is real. But here's what's also real. Canada is a country of communities, not one big abstract nation state, but thousands of communities from St. John's to Prince Rupert, knitted together by shared interests, shared values, and shared history with our neighbors to the south. Joe Clark, a former Canadian Prime Minister, said it best. Canada is a community of communities. Here's what you can actually do. 1, stay informed with primary sources. Don't rely on social media algorithms to tell you what matters. Read the actual trade agreement documents. Follow the actual parliamentary debates. 2, support local businesses that are under tariff pressure. Before you order from an American supplier, check if there's a Canadian alternative. This is a small act, but multiplied across millions of households, it's meaningful. 3, contact your MP, especially if you're in a manufacturing, energy, or agriculture-dependent riding. MPs respond to constituents. Your voice matters more than you think. Reject the apathy trap. Every time you hear someone say, nothing matters, or all politicians are the same, push back, not with anger, with facts, with history, with the reminder that democracies are only as strong as their engaged citizens. 5, channel energy into community, volunteer, support your local food bank, help your neighbors. Because if the economic pressure does get worse before it gets better, it will be communities, not governments, that catch people when they fall. Canada has been through worse. The Depression, 2 world wars, the FLQ crisis, separatism, previous trade wars. Every single time, Canadians found a way through. Not because the government had all the answers, but because the people refused to give up on each other. That's not sentiment, that's history. Hope isn't a naive strategy. It's the foundation every resilient society is built on. And right now, Canada needs both eyes open about the problems we face and both hands working on the solutions we can build. Thanks for watching. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you disagree with something I said, tell me in the comments. Seriously, the best conversations happen when people actually engage. See you in the next one.